I see trees of green.
I've got a background in farm trees, grew up surrounded by trees of all sorts, and at one point I bought myself a little sawmill, then another, and worked out that if you milled it right, sugar gum was a pretty handy timber, and no one was milling it, no one was planting it, no one was studying it. In 1998, I went to a Master TreeGrower Course at Creswick. 1998, yeah, I don't look that old, I know, but so we somehow there were people at this Master TreeGrower Course who thought it must be possible to make more money out of our trees. Maybe we can mill them up and export them to the USA where they love this sort of stuff. So we thought, and there was someone who was into eucalyptus botryoides, southern mahogany. There was me into sugar gum. There was a guy who was into manna gum. There was a man who was into messmate. There was a man who was into radiata pine. I can't remember. There were a few other people, and we We got some support from Central Victorian Farm Plantations Regional Plantation Committee. This is about 1999, 2000 maybe, and they funded us to get a marketing study done of which of these species might be the one that would appeal to the, I don't know, the industry. How do you get a timber that the industry doesn't know to be so sought after that the industry will pay the highest figure for the wood when it's unproven? And so that was our challenge. So we shamelessly promoted ourselves in all directions and told them how wonderful this timber was. And in about 2002, we realised we needed, 2002 we formed Smart Timbers Cooperative, we realised we needed more information about how people elsewhere did this. And so I got a Churchill Fellowship to travel the world looking at how forestry management associations actually made money. So that's what took me to North Slopes, or took me to various other conferences. Canada, USA, Ireland, UK, France, Hungary, which was nice. I always wanted to go to Hungary. And Hungary is interesting because their focus timber was black locust, which had come from with a monk in the pocket of his cassock in 1690 or whenever it was, picked up in south central USA where it's native, took to Hungary, and now there were 300,000 hectares of it in Hungary, and it's a terrific species, a little bit of an exotic weed. But you see it as a street tree. But anyway, Finland, Denmark, Norway, Japan, and maybe I missed a few. And so all the way I took my piece of sugar gum flooring, and I'd go into the sawmill and I'd hand it to the sawmiller, and he would put out his hand and expecting it to be the weight of oak, because it looks a little bit like oak, and I feel that it was about twice the density of oak. And then he'd sort of show it was a bit of real interest. So that thing of marketing, so we and again up the back under the table, I think there is a box of made up little cupboard doors of manna gum, blackwood, sugar gum, possibly a couple of other species that you might be able to identify because the labels have fallen off, but they're various other eucalypts and blackwood, I said. And so we used some of these to take around and publicise to people. And we took bits of flooring around and showed it to flooring people, and at the beginning we thought we would be selling into the furniture market. And the furniture market obviously would be paying us a lot of money. And so to start off with, we were pig ignorant, and we had to learn very fast. And so we got a lot of our timber milled up into 35 mil thick for tabletops and benches and maybe chair tops. And then we realised that people who make tables only want enough for one table at a time. We've got to drive it there and deliver this, couple of 100 kilos of wood, and then, so there was no money in that. Stair treads. And so we finally worked out that what we had to do was mill into 75 by 25. I'll stick with imperial. 3x1s, 4x1s, 5x1s, 6x1s as our feedstock. Dry that out, turn that into flooring, cladding, decking. All that one species, none of which had been developed before. There was nobody who dealt in sugar gum. So this was 2002. By about 2008, because of our shameless self-promotion and, not exactly lying about anything, but making up a certain amount of stuff, sugar gum was the most planted low rainfall species across southern Australia. Up to 8,000 hectares have been planted. At the beginning, you couldn't buy sugar gum in cell trays for planting with potty cookies, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, those red finish planting tools. By 2008, Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, a little bit into southern New South Wales were being able to get not very good quality, genetic quality sugar gum to plant on farms, including for carbon sequestration, and there was a bit of activity with that. But in the process of travelling around, so these are the things I was going to cover. But in the process of travelling around the world, I was looking at what else you could do. So we got deeply into the whole process of marketing and got quite good at it. One way and another, Smart Timbers became fairly proficient in the issues of planting and thinning and how to do all of that sort of thing cost effectively, always banging your head against the wall of this no availability of good quality genetics. 2008, I got a Gottstein Fellowship because I woke up to the fact of bioenergy. What you do with all of the part of the tree that isn't able to be turned into a wood product, you can turn it into energy. In fact, we're just about to burn our stubbles at home. If that was in Denmark, we would be in jail that night. It's just not allowed. It hasn't been allowed in most of the EU since about 2002. It's been illegal since about the start of 2002 in most of these countries. And so I woke up to that in about 2006. That bioenergy and farm forestry were two sides of the coin, really, or travelling along in parallel. And in among there is also carbon and the other issues of non-wood product. And so Rita asked if I could talk a little bit about this issue of demand and how, where we get the product managed. So that whole thing is starting Smart Timbers, and I'm sorry I'm going around a little bit, but I'll narrow it down now. We started off, this is this little core group. We didn't have a forester among us. We never ever picked up a forester. We didn't want to have a head foresters, frankly, because they'd already been trained in a certain way of thinking. We were a builder, a number of farmers, a journalist come lawyer. That was our makeup, with some experience in planting trees. We were blindly optimistic and we had passion, and that's terrific. And you have to have all of that, but you have to have that group that is really practical, the group that's good at raising money, the group that is good at keeping that society of that growing cooperative or whatever it is together and bringing them together on a regular basis and communicating. This thing of who you should ignore, the experts all said it would not work. The experts said we could not take this timber and turn it into a product selling just below recycled woolly blackbutt. something like $5,000 a cubic metre. They said you'll only be able to sell it at about the price of milled native forest timbers of about, best you'll get is $1,200 a cubic metre. $1,200 a cubic metre wasn't going to work. So we ignored them. We had to ignore them. None of them said, yeah, this might be interesting, yes, well, let's give you some support. Making the money work, we started off our cooperative with $35,000, and that was probably really good. We got some from the government, some from a couple of other sources. Other bits we picked up. And then we sold shares, 10 cent paid up, I can't remember how many shares, but we made a few $1,000s out of shares, selling shares, to our 40 or so members at the beginning. The thing of knowing your timber, when I went to Finland is my benchmark for how to do this sort of thing. They have 3 species of timber, a spruce, a pine and silver birch. Any country that has silver birch as one of its 3 primary timber species, you know they're really going to be struggling, but not a bit of it. So they use silver birch for anything, including extract the sweetener that goes into this chewing gum, which you can only buy in Finland. maybe not, I don't know. And they turn silver birch into just about everything that you could imagine, including peel the bark off and make it into a decorative cladding inside buildings. And the other species are just very low density conifers, like our radiata pine. Yet they are able to value add them in all directions. And so the Finns just know their timber. And so we very quickly began to know our sugar gum. We know that is kiln dry. It is about 1,100 kilos per cubic metre, so it will sink in water. It's got a janky hardness of whatever it is. It's got its gluing quality is really difficult because it's a slightly oily timber. We know it will steam bend if it's back sawn. We know it won't steam bend if it's quarter sawn, and on and on and on. And so we know that if you're going to lay it as flooring, you have to secret nail it down through the tongue. You can't nail it with a power nailer right through the top to bottom of a 19mm. It just will not penetrate. Maybe there's some nail guns that will, but a normal nail gun won't. So you have to pre-drill everything. And so all of these things you have to know. You have to know to a degree what its susceptibility is to termites, to rot, to weathering, to checking, and so on. Because the people who are buying it off, you want to know this sort of stuff. You've got to know whether the sapwood is prone to leptospora or not, which this is, and a lot of native forestry species are. And so it helped that we were concentrating on that one species. And so we could just focus on that one. We could focus on that particular slot of the market, which was mainly in the end the people who were laying decking and wanting cladding. The people who they're not so interested in FSC certification or AFS certification. They just want to be assured that it is coming out of farm forestry logs, that you can warrant it, that you can look them in the eye and say, this is fair dinkum, sustainably produced stuff. So knowing your timber is critical. The limitations of the whole thing are where it starts to get tricky as well. You have to be able to mill it well. You have to have a series of specialists in your chain of supply. From the people you get your logs off, they have to cut them to 300mm integer lengths. So they have to be above 2.7 metres long. They have to be no more than 5 metres long. This is what I'll start again. Most mills will have a specific that they can't mill shorter than, that they can't mill longer than. A lot of the places that will take kiln drying, and we did try kiln drying right at the beginning, will have kilns that can't take a pack longer than a certain amount. In the case of Creswick, it was 5 metres. And so the case of Pyrenees Timber, one of the family mills that we started working with very early on in the place, they made their sticked out racks to 5 metres. They made them a certain width, which unfortunately wasn't the width that Creswick kiln took, so we'd send them a pack and they'd have to repack it into another wider pack, and that would cost money. Anyway, all of these things you work out as you go along. And we chose a business structure, and somewhere I've got the business plan that we produced for this cooperative. We didn't ever consult it again. You just have to have a business plan. The most important part of it was our exit strategy for how we wound the thing up at the end, which is always a bit messy. And getting this right mix of people, like I said, you need to have the visionaries, the optimists, the people who will fantasise about how much money they'll make, but you have to have those really hard-headed people as well. I said Finland is my benchmark. Been going there since 2003, sometimes twice a year. And the Finns, as you know, they're right on got a 1,300 kilometre border with Russia. They're really nervous at the moment. They've had experience with Russia in 1939, 40, 41. But this is how they used to do all their removal of timber out of their forest. And they've got to figure that 1 in 5 Finns is a forest owner. And forest is everywhere. Forest makes up, I used to know all these statistics really well, forest makes up 67% of the land area, covers 67% of the land area. Private foresters, individuals and families produce 80% of the 60 million cubic metres that is produced in Finland. They used to import from Russia another 20 million. A lot going into paper. The Finns, you know, you can only do so much with horses and sledges, and in midwinter when the ground's nice and hard, and so they couldn't stop themselves from trying to develop mechanical ways. And so you go to some of these field days and there'll be Massey Fergusons and Fords with tracks and then little funny sort of not very well engineered cranes on the top. And this was taken at a Ponce field day, and as you all know, Ponce is a major Finnish machinery manufacturer for harvesters and forwarders. Started off in the 1970s, a bloke named his machine after his dog. And so it kept on being called after the dog, and this is one of the latest Ponces in 2010, which is when I was there at a field day. But the point of the Finns is that they had been largely deforested by the Swedes, who ran the place until when it was that the Russians took it over. And they had become really deforested down to about 25% land cover. And in about 1878, they decided that they needed to turn this around, and they passed a set of legislation, which is still the core of the basis of all of their sustainable forest management. And with a whole lot of rules, and one of the rules was that if you fell a forest, you have to replant the forest or remanage the forest. If you thin it, you have to thin it right. If you don't do that now, you get taken to court, they take the forest off you, and the organisation, the regional organisation, will manage it and charge you as the owner. And so what has happened is that Finland has gone from about 25% forested in 1860s to back in the days of steam, probably sail, when a lot of forest was getting turned into wood tar, or whatever you call it, for waterproofing hulls, to 67%. And the interesting thing with Finland is the largest single source of energy consumed in Finland is from biomass, from as sawdust, or as pellets of one sort or another, or as wood chip. Something like 30% total, and increasing. 19% of their power. A lot of it in industry. So Finland is the first country in the world to have passed a national government legislation that they will become a circular economy. They already were a bioeconomy. You go to Finland, everything that can be made of wood is made of wood. And per capita, they're using about 8 cubic metres of wood a year per capita, whereas I think across the EU it might be a cubic metre per capita a year, and in Australia, don't know, no one's ever thought of thinking what the figure might be. So as I said, where I come from had a whole lot of mature plantings, old plantings dating back into the 1880s, 1870s. And over mature, that's fine with sugar gums, you get them being host to parrots and possums and bees. But since 1994, we've started planting blue gums, and then later and later we planted a lot more sugar gums and so on. And so I've been doing the managing of all of these plantings. They're all wide, multi-purpose plantings, planted in a certain place for a certain purpose, and that was planted across a break of slope. Below it was a saline flat. Above it was a recharge area of sort of granitic soil. And so it seemed to make sense to put 20 hectares of plantings across there. 10 hectares was going to go to pulp, 10 hectares I was going to lift prune and pick. And we've been doing all sorts of other plantings. This is my kids planting with a tractor-drawn single pass, a ripper, a disc culture and a ripper, and then you, in this case, planting a tube stock, and I'm walking along behind because every now and again my daughter the soil would fall down and the little press wheels would push the thing underneath, so I'd have to find it, lift it up, firm it up. That's ready to be thinned, that planting now, and we're planting others where off-shear sheep can go in, because we get these really nasty spring storms, rain, howling gale, running for days, and you can lose an awful lot of sheep very quickly. So this is just talking about some of the issues. Some years back I bought this old Swedish forwarder. It's a narrow enough forwarder that fits up these 10-metre rows. In theory I could put a grapple saw on it and be able to cut a tree and put it on the back, but to date I've used the other guy who, with the little 15-tonne tract harvester, to do the felling and lay the poles down, and I go and pick the poles up and then sell them to firewood cutters. And I've not that long ago bought this versatile, articulated, about 8-tonne with a crane fitted onto it, a slewing forestry crane. All through Finland you will see these things. This is the only one I know of in Victoria. I only know of one other, bit more super professional than this, in Eastern Australia. There might be one in the West. In Finland, there would be probably 1,000. And not just the thinning harvester, but the forwarder that goes with it, which might be a trailer forwarder, possibly a chipper. And it might be owned by a little consortium of people who would be supplying chip to the local swimming pool or the local nursing home or hospital. But here, because of the lack of policy, we are sort of only just staggering along. So the aim is to try and make our thinning cost neutral, but that means that the trees have to be left to get up to firewood diameter, which means that they've started to get past the point of competing with each other. But that's the problem. I've taken this off another presentation, that's why it's sort of got slightly weird wording, but the point of it is, in our area we get that sort of growth from new planted to ready to be thinned in 10 years, and that's the same site, basically taken from nearly the same point. And nearly entirely sugar gum. Sometimes I'll do an edge planting of black bottle or something, but not too many things can compete with sugar gum. But at the moment, what we are trying to push to state government is that we could have 500,000 hectares across the state of this sort of type of planting. But for that, we have to have better genetics. For that, we have to have better market signals. For that, we have to have, preferably, energy coming from, or a concept, a policy for energy from all the thinnings and the heads and the... anything else that's not marketable. And so out of half 500,000 hectares, you could be running a number of small power stations, and we'll get to that in a minute. So, but when we're doing our planting, I've just got that tree there because I particularly like that tree, but in summer you see every bit of shade used by sheep. They will go for shade, and then you see some farm with no shade at all, and you think, what the hell is going on there? There's got to be a productivity value in having shade. And if you talk to a dairy farmer, they see their productivity value day by day in the milk yield. Whether it's cows being in the sun, getting hot and sweaty, or whether it's cows being out in the weather, freezing in winter, and with no shelter. So for us, we plant for green corridor connections. We plant for waterlogged areas. We plant for along streams. We plant for shade and shelter. Don't know about the habitat. We never used to have grey kangaroos. Now we've got heaps of grey kangaroos, and they get out in the crops and they lie around and they sort of bang around the new landcare plantings, particularly the young males who are doing the young male thing. And that thing of green hood orchids came as a complete surprise. It was in just total sugar gum litter. And what is going on with green hood orchids growing up through that? And it was not just a couple of square inches, it was square feet of green hoods. So something is happening there. But back to smart timbers again. We very early on we learned that if you're going to send a truckload of logs to a mill, which might be 25 tonnes, and that's our notional parcel that's our minimum parcel. We would never take 1 or 2 logs, but you could do it. And we would normally end wax them or end paint them so that they don't start drying out too fast, because normally they're getting harvested in that September, October, November period. After November, the hollows, the parrots and things are starting to nest in the hollows, so you don't want to do it until maybe February, March. So you've got to find that time when everything's trafficable. So this is one of our members end waxing or painting the ends of his logs. And so we would send that 25 tonnes off to a mill. The mill would mill it on contract to our specifications, but we are picking logs that don't have hollows, don't have rot up the centre, are straight, are between 2.7 and 5 metres long, no bends, no great amount of taper. So you're wanting to send the best logs away so you get the best recovery. If you're getting really, your recovery at best can be 40%, maybe 45, depending on what you're milling it into. At worst can be 25. Same log, costs the same to truck, costs the same to mill, but you're getting nearly half as much good timber out of one. And so we were sending away to 2 mills. This was a regular sort of mill that would be cutting maybe 3,000-4,000 cubic metres of log a year. And we were sending them, I don't know, 300. We might have been at one point 10% of their processing, and so they treated us quite well. So they would break it down back in the mill with this big great breaking down saw, which might have had, I don't know, getting up to almost a centimetre of kerf in the saw blade, this massive saw blade about that height. And it's going through, so every pass it's eliminating a centimetre of wood. And then it would go through a resaw bench, and that might have had a kerf of half a centimetre, so every pass it's eliminating another half centimetre. So that's the problem with milling into these smaller cross sections or smaller thicknesses. And so the wood's coming out and getting made into, sticked out into these racks of different qualities. That might have been 3 different grades. And so early on in the piece, if you go in to buy wood at Bunnings, you'll get the choice of select, or there might be feature grade, there might be another, there might be 2 or 3 different grades. We just had standard and better and feature. Standard and better was our version of pretty good, and feature was our version of marketable. So depends on what people are wanting. And there would be a bit of a difference in price, and 2/3 maybe would go into standard or better, and 1/3 would go into feature grade. And so when we're turning it into something like this, so it's just perfect. A tiny bit of borer hole and a tiny bit of gum bone, but with sugar gum it's generally pretty clear anyway. And so that would sell 20% more, maybe 30% more than the feature grade would, and that's our premium product. So we'd mill it out, we'd wrap it up, sticked out in black builder's plastic, covering all sides bar the bottom, loosely wrapped with a binding strap of something around, not metal, but like electrical tape or something that will last a year or two, until it's dry, down below 15%, and then it gets profiled into the final product, mixed length, no shorts under, in this case it might have been 2.5 metres, but sometimes it would go down to 900, whatever the joists are in a standard building, and then laid. And so that's each one of these steps. The person who's doing the trucking, the person who's doing the milling, the person who is doing the profiling, and in our case, the person who is doing the marketing, we're all sort of fairly pedantic, expert type of people. They try to do things well. We just fluked this. The person who did the felling also. We just fluked that we were able to put this chain of supply together that we're all, to a degree, perfectionists. And in among it all, we've done a certain amount of R&D. We got some funding, I think, from Joint Venture Agroforestry Program to do a recovery trial of 4 different logs with a certain amount of difference in taper, and one had a bit of a bend in it, and it was all run by this forester guy, retired forester, and it all got written up as a report for JAGO. We've done another project on the whole process of marketing, and I've got the copy of that there. We've done somehow or other, the state government, DPI, I think at the time, in 2007, gave us $35,000 to write up all our learnings, and they appointed a state government person, who's this nice lady, and her sole job was to make sure we didn't say anything nasty about the DPI and how hopeless it was. So that's all right. So we didn't, because we were grateful for the $35,000, and we did a nice write-up, and it probably needs another chapter or two about the things that go wrong and the things that wreck you in the end. So this was an example of when we were going full bore, and we were taking something like 300 or 400 tonnes of logs, turning it into mostly rough sawn, air dried 4x1 to 6x1, oversized, milled oversized, and then getting orders for whatever it might have been. Shiplap. We got out of flooring pretty quickly because it was sort of too complex and too high a cost at the start. But shiplap, where it's an overlapping board, so it nails through there and maybe there, and then the rain sheds that way up. So the rain sheds down the thing, and that was in quite high demand for I don't know, extensions and beach houses and things. I've been referring to things that I said we had done. We also did a thing on carbon pooling, where if you had a mass of different farm foresters across the region and they wanted to sell the carbon in their plantings, how do you do that? How do you make that work? This was back in the time of Kevin Rudd and the CPRS, Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme. And everyone was talking carbon, and the DPI were starting to talk about carbon plantings. And other people were planting oil mallee and so on, including sugarcane for carbon sequestration. And and Tony and Rita were getting busy on marketing sequestered carbon in the same sort of way. So we did a study for how that might work if the CMAs managed the area pool and traded that carbon, got the figures, and so our R&D went in all different directions. But very early in the piece we started off with sugar gum because everyone was after red gum, and we thought, well, you know, there's got to be a market for sugar gum. We'd all been burning it ourselves for generations, and we thought it was pretty adequate timber, and it's nice and dense, burns well. And so unfortunately it's really taken off, and now we've got firewood cutters felling the trees through the landscape, including old trees. But it turns out that sugar gum and red gum and a number of other species are quite good for growing shiitake mushrooms on, and that's one thing you can do with your thinnings. And this is sugar gum thinnings, cut to 4 feet long. They're just racked out, ready to be shocked into action. Then they'll be separated, stuck on spikes, and they've already been inoculated with the shiitake spore. But sugar gum makes terrific honey. Sugar gum in the top right-hand corner is there, not just sugar gum, but that's a bioenergy plant where Beaufort Hospital was using $80,000 worth of LPG a year. Now they're using $35,000 worth of wood chip a year for the same amount of timber, creating a local job, not sending the money off to Melbourne or wherever. And the little bit of ash that comes out of that 100 kilowatt burner in that container, one half of that container's sort of a holding box for chip, and the other half has got the little burner and a couple of hot water tanks. And so I said, you know, you can go for 8x2s, but you can also go for other things. And this was, I came across this in a small city, maybe a large town called Hur in Sweden, H-O-O-R, with umlauts on top of each of the O's. I couldn't pronounce it properly. But it was just a sort of a recreation workout area for kids or adults, and it just seemed like a terrific thing. And I don't think they're treated. They're just round wood. It would be a conifer in that area, and it's just the complete workout thing that you could put your primary school kids running around. Hopefully they don't fall over and break their arms, because some of those things are a little bit higher than others, but maybe you wouldn't be allowed to make that these days. But it's all about how you produce something that's worthwhile. Smoking meats. You go into Bunnings, there are all these little chunks of milled up apple and hickory and half a dozen other woods, some of them imported, and also sawdusts of these sort of things. And it turns out that sugar gum isn't bad for smoking eels either, but no one's ever publicised it. We're getting into energy, and that'll be it. Sweden is another example, I think. When I was there last, it was 39% of all of their consumed energy was coming from biomass, mostly from wood, mostly the residues of forestry. They're a very big and effective forestry industry there. Nearly all run by 3 big cooperatives, which have gradually eaten all of the other smaller cooperatives. And so Södra is the biggest one. It's in the south, Södra means south. And that was actually in a park in a town, Jönköping, which is just beside Husqvarna, where the chainsaws come from. And they were there because, I don't know, a bit of rot or a bit of insect damage, not good enough to go to pulp, not good enough to go to milling. And so that's what happens. All of this secondary defect wood will be going off to energy. All the heads, in some places, even the sort of tiny branches and the needles. But that's getting it. In some cases, the stumps. But so there's a lot of work being done on all of this about the sustainability and the removal of nutrient and so on. In 2009, the Scott Steam Fellowship was looking at and energy in Denmark, Sweden and Finland. And it took me all around the place. This was a small town that was getting all its heat from this plant, 20 megawatts of heat, for industry and households, nursing homes, swimming pools, whatever, schools. And that was reticulated around the town in out and return loops. It would go out at about 100 degrees, 95, 100 degrees. Heat exchanger would be taking it off heat, no removal of volume, just removal of heat from that loop as it goes, that water as it's going around, sort of treated water with like antifreeze. And it's coming back at maybe 45 to 60 degrees, whether it's summer or winter. And then it gets heated up again and then it goes off again. And there's no evaporative cooling for the steam cycle of the little steam turbine that was also in this. It's producing about not quite enough electricity for the town, about 5 megawatts, which is a little bit small. Normally you'd never find them under 15 and much more normally under 25. But this was a good example. This is a 25 megawatt one, much more standard, bringing in 230,000 tonnes of quite wet chip from up to 100 kilometres radius. And the point is, it has no cooling tower. It has no evaporative cooling for the steam cycle because that is done by the heat that's going around the district. The heat is actually priced per megawatt hour at higher than the electricity. The electricity is just complementing nuclear power and hydropower from Sweden and whatever. But the heat is the stuff that you can't send very far. And so it's a classic thing. It's far cheaper to produce electricity this way, capital cost, than solar or wind. No one, useless media never say this sort of thing. And you're just getting nowhere. Anyway, next one, please. So Finland, Sweden, Lithuania, Latvia, Denmark's heading that way to be having at least somewhere around half of their energy from biomass. Austria's heading that way. Spain, I'm not too sure. They've got quite a significant investment in all of that sort of area. UK, strangely enough, finally coming around to it. But this is an example of something else here. You might not be able to see it. It was a member of the Smart Timbers board who was a bit of a unique character, and this is up in the Pyrenees somewhere near Avoca, and it's his planting. And he had got the bulldozer driver in his ripping of the lines to spell out Pyrenees plantations CO2 sink. And apparently the S's were really hard if you're driving a bulldozer. Not so hard the I's. And it's still growing. This is taken from by satellite. Anyway, or iPlane, I don't know. But he's done all the thinnings. That's his superannuation policy. Hundreds of hectares of red ironbark and sugar gum and different colours. Farm Forest Growers Victoria, we've got $500,000. By the time it hits the ground, it'll be $400,000 because different bodies are taking off a bit for managing. And it's designed to give us better genetics of the main species that haven't yet been selected for improvement. So up till now, we've basically been sugar gum and a whole lot of other things. So basically a wild genetics, and to identify the best trial sites that might have been put up in the early 2000s, late 1990s, that are still out there that the locals know about, that the state government, because they've changed, identity about 20 times since, have forgotten about. And also to find model plantings like John Woodley's, examples of how things can be put together, how things can be thinned, how things can be, higher and lower in the same spot or whatever it might be. And trying to find all of these reports that have been done. And that's the last one. I saw that in the street in Tasmania, this little girl, not sitting over on the seats where she should have been, but sitting on this, I don't know, Tasmanian devil or whatever it was. If you've got a nice fat little short log that is just completely unmarketable, some sculptor will be really happy. That's it.
I think to myself, what a wonderful